and welcome back to the Summer Days Use YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be picking up where we left off in the first part of this series, where I teach you how you can model anything hard surface wise in Maya. Of course, this also applies to other 3D software as well, like 3ds Max and Blender. So let's get right into part two. So where we left off last time, I believe we had built a few of these parts. We'd basically created the body, this part of the head, and then this part of the visor here, and I'd asked you to go away and finish the rest, like the legs and the feet and so on. And that's what I've gone ahead and done. And as you can see here, there's really not too much to this model. Yes, we've gone ahead and adjusted a few things. So we have this leg shape here, which has just been extruded out of a cylinder. We've added some bevels to add this chamfer effect as well that we can see in the reference. And I've added a few bits and pieces to this body as well. But as far as blocking is concerned, I'm not going to take this any further. And this is where I'm happy to start adding detail and continuing from here. And by adding detail, I don't mean tiny little bits of detail. What I'm talking about more is, if we look at this reference here, is I'm not talking about these sort of things. This kind of detail, right? This little pipe doohickey, whatever that is supposed to be, these wires, all of this extra nice greebling, kit bashing type stuff in the inside leg. I'm talking more about these larger shapes. So the way I like to think about this is we break this down into the larger forms. So we have this headpiece, okay, like this. Then after that, we're going to break it down into the next stage, which are shapes like this triangular piece here, this little notch up here, you can just about see that, that kind of stuff as well. The same with these eyes. Right now we just got these couple of cylinders, but we can do some work here just with simple extrudes, nothing crazy to get those looking the same. Same with this earpiece here. So I'm going to show you kind of how I like to start doing that, and a lot of it is just using the same techniques we did last time, like using the blueprints. So to begin with, why don't we start out with this triangular part here? So I'm sure a lot of you maybe can get to this point where you're comfortable blocking out the model, getting it to this stage, because it's fairly comfortable, right? It doesn't take too long. You're just making things from simple shapes. It's nothing crazy, but then maybe you're not sure where to start. So one thing I always like to think about, like I said just now, is break this down into steps. So we have big, medium, small. So we've done the big. Okay, that being this blocking. The medium, again, is this triangle stuff, and the small will be the little bits, but we'll get to that some other time. We're going to do medium bits. So I am going to come to our side view, and I'm going to re-enable my reference layer. And as you can see in the reference, we have that triangular piece. So that's great for us because it means we know exactly where this needs to be. We know everything is matching. If I go ahead and highlight everything, you can see that's overlaying the blueprints perfectly. If things are slightly off, don't worry. You know, get it as close as you possibly can. But yeah, so let's go ahead and start adding this kind of detail in here. So one thing you've probably noticed is we have a big n-gon here, as in a face that has more than 5 sides, but I'm not too worried about that. I like to fix topology afterwards, because fixing it now, you know, you never know where you're going to have to change it again, or if it's going to get in the way of anything that we're trying to do now. So I'm just going to take the multi-cut tool, and I'm just going to add a big old cut down there. And I'm going to straighten this out just by doing a reverse scale. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if I tried to just use the multi-cut tool here, it's not going to add a whole loop, and I want to separate this off for the time being, and also just to give us something to build off of. Okay, so I am going to just place a point here, and I'm going to come out. I'm going to hold Control Shift, and I'm just placing points. I'm not particularly worried about following the shape perfectly at the moment. I'm just getting those points into place, roughly following the blueprints. Okay, so we have the outline. And we know that shape needs to fit within this. Okay, and again, what we can now go ahead and do is add another edge loop for the actual size of this piece. Okay, and then we know we have this diagonal separator. So we're literally just going to go ahead and cut this in. Okay, like that. Okay. Simple as. And then if we need to adjust this slightly, we can just raise that up. And I'm not particularly concerned about, you know, getting this absolutely perfect right now. I'm also not worried about this incredibly bad topology. I think that's something that you're going to have to think about as you're doing this, is don't get caught up in trying to make perfect topology straight away. Yes, it's something you need to plan out, but we can clean this all up later. Okay, that's not right now's problem. Right now's problem is getting this shape in there, and then we can figure out how it works afterwards. A bit more complicated if it's more curved, but then we'll get to that, and that would also, we'd have more geometry to work with, so we wouldn't have to cut in like this. Anyway, so once we have that in, what I like to do is just go ahead and do an extrude. So I'm going to select these faces, and we're going to set this more into stone now, and we're going to push that into the model. One thing as well that I have forgotten to do, but that you should definitely do, is make a backup. Just press Ctrl D, okay, maybe move it out of your group, whatever, so you have a backup, and then you can just hide it. And then I might name this something like backup head. Okay, just so that we know that we can come back to this if we do mess something up. No worries whatsoever. Next thing I like to do as well before continuing is I am going to go ahead and add some bevels to these corners, because as you can see here, they're slightly rounded. And it's always better to have those actually modeled in, I think, than just relying on keeping these, like having holding edges and then doing it with a subdivide. And I'm just going to do 2 divisions. We don't want this to be anything crazy. And I'm going to check on my reference to make sure this is roughly the right size, which it looks to be. Okay, and then again, we've got absolutely hideous topology, but you can see we now have that detail in there. Okay, and that really wasn't too bad at all, was it? In terms of cleaning this up, what I would do is take a look at the surrounding model, and we're going to see if there's anything else we need to take into account. So looking at our blueprints, looking at our reference, you can see there aren't really too many other panel looking things, okay? At least on this side, the main panels are this big piece that we've just extruded in, and this one as well. We do have some extra little lines here and stuff like that going around, but we're not particularly worried about that right now. What we could do is, you can see there's a panel line here, so I could literally just add a cut. Okay, and it's all about just taking this slowly, just like with the blocking. There's no need to rush this. Take your time with it, because this part can be a little bit more fiddly, and it's where you're probably going to make most of your mistakes. You can see we've got another part of the line there, and then here as well, we'll go ahead and just add in a cut. Again, this is where things are starting to get a bit tricky, because you can see we've got all these interlocking lines, which are now starting to, you know, connect in more ugly ways than we probably want. Than we probably need. So it does start to get tricky now. But again, just take your time with it. Okay. There's literally no rush whatsoever. What I kind of like to do at this stage as well is I'll make another duplicate of this, and then I'm going to select the faces which I know want to be separate panels. And the reason why I want these to be separate panels is, if, you know, you could do this all in texture as well, and this is really going to depend on what you're doing, but we're trying to do some more complex hard surface stuff, so we'll have it be separate geometry. But these 2 parts are separate materials, they clearly look like separate panels, so I'm going to separate them out. So on the duplicate, I'm going to select the faces I want to keep. We're going to go to select and then go to inverse and then just delete everything else. So we now have these as separate panels and separate pieces that we can bring out to their a bit more out here. And then I can just take those out of that group and then just hide them for the time being. Maybe give them a name like panel head or something. Okay, now we have that cleanly saved, that shape, and then we can start working on cleaning up the topology for this. So what I would do for this is, on curved corners like this, if we were to subdivide this, obviously right now it's going to look hideous and not work, but generally when you have a modeled in bevel like this, you're going to want holding edges like this, roughly the same distance as you do for the actual curved part. The reason being is, if you don't do this, when you go ahead and subdivide this, this corner is actually going to collapse a little, and this straight line here won't be so straight. It's going to bow a little bit more, like in a slight arc, and it will be quite noticeable. So I always like to put in these little parts. Not super important that you do that, but it's just a nice thing to do, in my opinion. I'm also going to add another edge just in the middle here, and the reason I'm going to do that is because, much the same as this corner, we have this same thing where it's curving and it's actually modeled in, and so in order to maintain this nice curve and have this straight line, we're going to want another edge as well to hold that. Also, why it's important is, if you've been watching any of my other videos, if we didn't have this, we're going to have to terminate one of these edges and have to come all the way up here. Now, when this subdivides, this diagonal edge might not cause any problems, but it could also create some shading artifacts. So this edge here just creates a nice handy barrier for us to literally just resolve this corner like that. Okay, and now we know that we have a safety net here in this edge, that none of this topology here will affect this curve. I hope that makes sense and isn't too complicated. This is definitely where it starts to get more complex and can be a little bit tricky to deal with. And I think this kind of stage, you just kind of have to... the only way I can describe that you learn this part is just by doing it. And I know that's maybe the worst thing to hear, because it's like, oh well, great, thank you. I could have figured that out for myself. But it really is true. I think one of my biggest hopes with this series is that I can help you gain some more confidence and not be afraid to make mistakes and try things out, because that's really, I think, what holds most people back. It's what holds me back still, and that's okay. But don't give up. So you can see we've now resolved that topology, and looking at the reference, we don't have any more panels here. We've already put those in the right place. We might need to actually delete these because we need an angle here, and we'll add that in a bit. So I won't actually resolve this side yet either. We'll just go ahead and delete those edges because we don't need them right now, like so. Okay. Now, if we wanted to add this panel, we can do much the same thing. What I'll probably go ahead and do is, if this is the same on both sides, which I believe it mostly is, then we can go ahead and cut this out. One thing I always like to do is just separate something in half before continuing, because especially if it's symmetrical on both sides, you only need to do one side and you can duplicate it over to the other side. Okay, that saves you a bit of time. Sorry if this energy saver icon has just come up. I'm on my laptop because I'm traveling at the moment. And then what I might go ahead and do is just select all of these faces and make up this panel. Okay, so just make sure we got everything, which looks like we do. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take it out. So it's an entirely separate piece. And now the topology here, we can clean up a little bit because we know we don't have to worry about it so much. Okay. What goes on now in this piece isn't going to affect this anymore. So whenever you can, I'd also encourage you to separate parts out. Not just for no reason. The only reason I'm separating this part is because you can clearly see in the reference that it's a separate panel. And for me, creating panel lines, it's easier just to have separate pieces rather than modeling them in. You know, it makes the topology a lot easier to deal with. And then maybe we could go ahead and just extrude this in slightly so that we can now add our bevel to give this a bit of a corner, or a rounded corner, sorry. Something like that. And then we can do the same on this guy. We can go ahead and extrude that in. Let's make sure we're selecting the right edges. Like so, and then we can go ahead and bevel these two to match. Set that to 2 segments as well, so that it matches the previous one. And then we can turn on wireframe on shaded, so we can make that line up, and then we'll just make sure that connects, which it does. And there you go. So you can see this kind of stage is very, very similar. It's just kind of a different type of modeling. We're getting more granular. We're kind of noodling around, cutting up the shapes. We're not worried so much about topology as long as things aren't breaking. But you can see here now we're getting there. We're starting to make progress on this. We can start resolving this kind of stuff. So we had this big nasty end-on, but now we can fix it by doing stuff like this. Okay. That's maybe not the cleanest way to resolve that, but you get the idea. Okay, and that will work. And it's flat, so I'm not too worried about it being 100% perfect. Okay, and you can see just like that, that end on there is fixed. And we can bring this edge across, have that come round. Same up here as well. We can have that come into the middle, and then conveniently as well, that adds that edge that we need so that we can keep these corners nice and round and keep this edge straight. Okay. And we're just keeping in mind where we need to start placing more of these edges. Okay, and if you're not doing subdivision modeling, if you have no plans of smoothing this, the topology is even less important, and you don't have to worry about fixing these n-gons, which is a nice convenience for you. But there you go, another n-gon gone, converted into quads. So you can see this stage is really just about taking things slow, fixing stuff up. And then once we've got all these n-gons fixed, we could then go ahead and like maybe add a bevel. Or we could probably even add a bevel to this now. If I was to select all these faces, go to edge perimeter, we can start beveling things as well. You can see very, very quickly you can start adding more detail to the shapes, okay? So it's much the same process. Again, one thing that I really can't say enough is when you're looking at your reference, pay attention to the separate parts. You know, spend as much time as you need to studying the reference, right? I'm doing this quickly, and I'd probably do it even slower than this I am on the video, if I were to actually do this, but then the video would be hours and hours long. But study your reference, make sure that you're making the right cuts. You always have to back up if you need to go back. And you're still keeping things as simple as you can to make sure that nothing goes wrong or that you don't make mistakes. But yeah, that's kind of how I go about adding more of the mid-sized details. Okay, let's continue just fixing up some of this topo. Okay, this here is not really resolving very nice, so we're going to delete some of those edges. We can do that a bit better. Okay, we're going to add another holding edge there. Have that come up. Okay, add in an edge loop. Make sure that lines up. You know, and I'm not too worried about what's going on top right now. We can fix that later. I'm just doing one thing at a time. Okay, that n-gon's now resolved. Okay, we can bring this across, have that come down. Okay, like so, and then have that come across. That now adds that holding edge, and we can have this come all the way to the end, and we don't have to worry about how this connects to this part because they're two separate pieces. Again, it's just the beauty of doing it that way and having separate panels. Okay, now we can clear this one up. Okay, that's a triangle right now, but if we delete the edge, that's now a quad. So you can see I'm very, very quickly cleaning up a lot of this stuff. Okay, so let's say we want to park that detail there for the time being, okay, and then move on to actually doing something else. There is a antenna that comes out of the top of this part here, if I open up the reference, and you can see there's this cylindrical hole there that comes out, and you might be thinking, oh, how are we going to add that? And that's one of the things I've been talking about in some of my videos. So because this shape is a little bit more complex, and also it's curved, we know we're going to need more topology. So one thing I like to do is, before subdividing this, I'm going to select those edges, go to the crease tool and just put that to the max. So if I smooth preview this now, you can see it holds those edges. Creasing is great in Maya because it allows you to basically fake a bevel, and it tells Maya you don't want those to be subdivided. Okay, so I can now just go ahead and smooth that. Maybe we'll do that just twice. Okay. And you can see we now have more topology here to work with, but we also have maintained those hard edges. And we've got nice even quads. So let's say I wanted to add just a big old hole in the top of this. I'm just going to select those faces. I'm going to use the circularize tool, which you can get from towards the end of the poly modeling toolkit. I'm going to change the alignment from automatic to surface per vertex. Reason being is automatic, you can see that's kind of flat. It's adding some weirdness. It's not maintaining the curvature of this cylinder. If I change it to surface per vertex, it then does. Okay. And I'm going to increase the radial offset a bit, and you can see that's also fixing up some of the topology some. And then we're going to look at our reference, check how big that hole has to be. Looks like it has to be a bit bigger, and then we're going to pull it out. Okay. And because this is a circular hole, it's going to work a little bit easier for us on this surface. We don't have any hard edges to put up with, so we're not too worried about this not working. If I were to go ahead and, let's say, just bevel these edges, just to prove the point. Okay, we'll go ahead and bevel everything, turn on or turn off chamfer. We go ahead and smooth this. Okay, you can see that that is not got any artifacts, and we've got that hole in there. Okay, and one of the reasons why is because, one, cylindrical holes are easier to put into cylindrical shapes, but also because we went through to the trouble of actually adding a subdivide first. Okay, and it's really that easy to put that kind of detail in, and it's just there now. If you had looked at this before, maybe without knowing how to do this, that would seem quite complicated to do, but it's really not. If you take your time, think about the density that you're going to need, the size of the hole, and then you can add these kind of details really quick. Okay, I'm just going to undo that bevel, because I don't like to bevel till right at the end, once things are cleaned up, because once you bevel, it's kind of hard to get rid of, and you don't want to be having to deal with that if you have to delete bevels. It's a pain in the butt. So I bevel last, if I can get away with it. And then once we've got that in, we can now do the easy part. We can do this nice simple extrude on the middle. You know, we'll just spend a bit of time selecting all these faces, come to the side, and then we can just extrude that in, you know, and then create whatever shape we need to now from here. So you can see it's kind of like, the way I could describe this is, let's say you were doing a marble sculpture or something like that. You would create all the forms, you know, maybe you'd make the hands, the head, like, and so on, and then you would start carving in like the fingernails and stuff, like some of the mid-sized details. Okay, and then basically what I would do is I would just keep going throughout this whole thing now, doing essentially what I've done here, extruding, fixing the topology, you know, not being too precious about things, separating separate panels out that need to be, and really just taking it to that next stage. And one thing I would say to do before you start adding details to anything is make a duplicate. Okay, I made this one a bit too late, but if I were to just go ahead and delete these faces, make sure I get everything. Okay, we now have a nice clean duplicate to go back to, just in case anything breaks. Okay, so always do that before you're adding more detailed stuff, and you can even save that in a separate group. Okay, but yeah, I hope this has been helpful. I wish I had more time to go through and do all of this in the whole video, but then it ended up being a very long video. But I hope this kind of helps to demystify the process a little bit and show you what the next steps would be after you've done the blocking. I think if you can take your time with this, if you can block out this model, do not be afraid. You can absolutely do everything else. I'm going to go ahead and go away and do exactly what I've done here on the rest. And by that, what I mean is just adding in cuts and extrudes like this kind of stuff here. This sort of thing here, maybe this inset here, but I'm not so worried about like this panel, right? Or these like little micro details. I'm talking about the mid-sized shapes, like these cuts out of this part, this recessed section, this recessed section. In fact, I think we actually already added that in the body. Yeah, we did. So yeah, I hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever or suggestions, please do leave those in the comments. Always like to see that. And thank you very much for all your support and views recently. They've been really helpful, and I hope that this series and these videos have been helping you out and helping to encourage you work on bigger and better projects and get better at doing what you love ultimately. So yeah, thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.